talk is by Spencer Caplan and Djarv from the University of Pennsylvania. And the title is Embedded V2 is Anti-License by Discourse Familiarity.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So let's get started. We'll talk about why embedded V2 is licensed by discourse. So the primary data from this study from Corpus of Swedish we'll be talking about, and the main phenomenon deals with the status of verb second order in Swedish. So that's obligatory in main clauses, as we can see in one. So when there's an adverb present, we can note that the verb is raised given the relative order. And in subordinate clauses, we see what we'll call optional verb second order. So either of the listed orders in 2 would be grammatical in such a case. But there are some theoretical and empirical challenges raised by embedded verb second because it involves what we can call optional movement of the finite verb to see. And optionality and syntax are not, our two best friends together. And this is a classic main clause phenomenon. So something we expect to be seen limited to main clauses when we see surfacing some of the time in embedded clauses raises some eyebrows. So big picture questions are, what drives the variable realization of embedded verb second and embedded main clause phenomenon more generally? The problem with any of this sort of work is that subtle and variable judgments make it difficult to provide a solid theoretical count based only on grammaticality of limited sentences alone. Additionally, theoretical and experimental work previously suggested fairly complex interaction of different linguistic and extra-linguistic factors. There's been some corpus data that's been helpful, but in fairly limited scope thus far. So the three goals of the talk are the main goal of the talk is going to be to test primarily 3 theoretical claims about the licensing of embedded verb second. There are 2 lexical accounts, the first of which is that factivity is what's blocking the derivation of main clause syntax. And embedded verb second is just an instantiation of that. Alternatively, the second lexical account, that EV2 is possible, although not obligatory, under a subset of Hooper and Thompson's predicate classes, which we'll reintroduce to those unfamiliar. Or on a pragmatic account, that EV2 is driven by main point / at issue status of the embedded proposition. So we'll go through these, we'll show why they all capture the relevant patterns, and alternatively propose that EV2 is blocked by discourse familiarity with some interesting data to support that claim. So how are we going to investigate the problem? We'd like to look at a corpus and be able to automatically identify the sentences which contain embedded clauses, which is our domain of application for the relevant phenomenon, and then automatically classify such sentences with respect to their EV2 status, and see which factors connect to such a status or not. However, without large-scale parse data, such a task is non-trivial. Luckily, there is a large amount of Swedish text data available freely online, which we extracted from Språkbanken, and it's been automatically part of speech tagging to a fairly high degree of quality. And luckily, it ranges across a broad range of genres and styles, from newspapers to online blogs and forums to very prescriptive government and academic texts. So the way this works is we developed an algorithm, all of which is available online if people want to play around with it or manipulate alternative experiments, that's going to take in a sentence in Swedish with part of speech tags and automatically tell you when there's a diagnostic, whether that sentence is embedded verb second order or we see verb in C2 order in the embedded clause. And this is going to rely on the ordering of the embedded verbs with respect to adverbs. So this is the case in negation, down to 3. Along the way, we can extract a wide range of statistical information that may also be correlating or not with this phenomenon. We need to see more about that. So we could compute rates of embedded verb second overall by the corpus, but we're really interested in the particular effects of individual verbs. So to get at that, we tagged approximately 20 verbs for each of the 5 semantic classes from Hooper and Thompson, based largely on frequency of taking the embedded clauses. And along the way, we get additional semantic properties that we're interested in, like factivity, etc. And this is all available. So the first sort of experiment is testing the primary lexical licensing account that factivity is what's blocking embedded verb second. So, as I'm sure everyone knows, factivity is this property that the presuppositions of certain predicates is going to be true, regardless of the true conditional status of the matrix clause. So John knows or regrets that it's raining, presupposes that it's raining, and that doesn't hold for verbs like say, believe, and deny. And the claim is that factivity, refactive predicates select a complement with a DP layer, and that definite restriction is going to block the derivation of main clause phenomenon, which would include embedded verb second. So if we computed the rates of an EV2 under factive predicates or non-factive predicates, if this were an important factor, we should see a significant difference in their realization. And we don't. We see broadly the same rates of embedded V2, and we can apply a statistical test and determine that these don't look like they're coming from 2 different distributions. So splitting over factivity doesn't seem like a reasonable barrier to embedded verb second. So Hooper and Thompson identify 5 predicate classes distinguished in terms of their lexical semantics that are relevant for the licensing of MCP generally. So speech act predicates, non-factive doxastics, and cognitive factives exemplified by the following things like say, believe, know. In general, and I'll give some examples from English, license MCP, and the emotive factives and the response stance predicates don't. So verbs like regret and doubt, deny, etc. So if we look at VP proposing in English, we have a sentence in 4 like Mary plans for John to marry her, and marry her he will. This is possible under the first set of those Hooper and Thompson verbs, things like say, believe, and know, but not under deny and resent. So we see that alternation in 5A and B. Weakland et al. Extend this claim to Swedish for embedded verb second, and there is some previous experimental data too that's supportive of this claim. However, our data is going to show only mixed evidence in favor of such an account. So we see here in the blue is going to be the 3 verb classes that were identified by Weakland et al. As licensing embedded verb second, and the 2 verbs in red are the verbs that were identified as not licensing embedded verb second. So this pattern seems broadly in line with that account. But this is only over one particular corpus that we looked at. It happened to be some sequence of blogs. If we look at any other subset of data, the pattern does not generalize. We see no significant difference in these sorts of government texts. And it's important to note that it's not because in the government texts the embedded main clause phenomena never occurs. They're still occurring at fairly consistent rates, but just we don't see the same differences between semantic classes. And more broadly, there are correlations between these predicate classes and rates of embedded verb second, but certainly nothing like the categorical predictions we make under a semantic licensing account. So there's too much variability by predicate class across distribution type, and this is contra a strong version of the lexical licensing account. Moreover, if we zoom in to within one of those particular predicate classes, we're going to see a lot of variability in rates. So if we jump, this is all the say class verbs that should be expected to pattern together if there's some formal semantic feature that's licensing this, and each dot is a verb, and the y-axis shows the rate of being a matrix to embedded V2 sentences, and we see a smooth climb all the way from verbs which are fairly common with this to verbs that just never surface with this in the corpus.
Thanks. So moving on to our own proposal. So basically what we're going to hypothesize is that this, what looks like a sort of discourse or genre effect, is driven by pragmatic factors. So the claim is that embedded V2 is associated with some particular pragmatic meaning, right? And so the overall meaning of a sentence with embedded V2 is going to depend on the pragmatic meaning of V2 in the embedded clause, or rather the embedded clause with embedded V2, as well as the lexical semantics of the selecting matrix predicates. Right. So basically the extent to which a particular sentence with a given meaning is used is going to vary across different types of discourses. So what is this meaning? So previous work that have given pragmatic accounts for the availability of embedded verb second have argued that embedded V2 is obligatory if the embedded clause provides the at-issue contents or is the main point of the utterance as defined with respect to some particular question under discussion. So for this example in English, we would expect that if this was Swedish, the embedded clause should be Victoria V2 on this kind of count. So some problems with this analysis. So previous work has manipulated the discourse precisely as we see in 6, and although there was a strong effect of lexical classes, there was no effect of the QD manipulation. And judgment data by other linguists who have worked on this support these findings, that this doesn't seem to make it obligatory. And moreover, if at-issue status or main point status is in fact was driving the distribution of embedded V2 across predicate classes, then what we would expect is the predicates that block embedded V2 in the complement should also block the availability of the embedded clause being the at-issue contents. So if we look at the emotive factors, verbs like present, appreciate, it seems to be true. This is pretty bad response, and embedded V2 is also bad. However, if you look at the response tense verbs, well, they don't really seem to behave like this. Here, the embedded clause is, at least part of what's at issue in the main point of the sentence. But embedded V2 seems to just be really bad under these verbs nonetheless. So what we're proposing is that the predicate classes, or rather just the predicates perhaps, that allow versus those that don't allow V2 are actually distinguished in terms of a different property. And this is the distinction between discourse novelty and discourse familiarity. So you basically allow your embedded clause to introduce completely new information that gets added to the common ground. So now if you use this sort of guess what kind of test, you walk into a room, you say, guess what? John told me that the precedent was signed, John told me the precedent was signed, or John just found out that the precedent was signed. Like, those are all fine in this particular context for the embedded clause. It's new information that gets added to the discourse. However, verbs like appreciate and regret, resent, those verbs that deny, accept, don't allow this. Right, so here discourse newness is pretty bad. This is basically just what I sort of said, but predicates allow embedded V2 independently also seem to behave in this particular way of allowing their complements to be discourse new information to the exclusion of, and that's a hold for the predicates that don't allow V2. So we're proposing that V2 is licensed by discourse novelty.
Can you speak more into that?
Sorry. Yeah. So now we're able to make a more general prediction, right, which is that discourse novelty versus familiarity should affect, the rates of embedded V2 independently of particular predicates. Right? But we have a problem. This is a corpus study, and we can't measure the common ground in a corpus, and especially not, a large one like this one. It would be a intractable task to try and do that. However, we make the second observation, which is that matrix negation has an effect on discourse novelty for volunteers. Predicates like say and believe, so the ones that we saw could introduce new information to discourse. So embedded under the negation in the matrix clause, it seems like this property or this ability goes away. So if you, again, uttered out of the blue, say, guess what? John didn't tell me that the precedent was signed, or doesn't think that he, then that's again very, very bad. Similar to what we saw with appreciate and doubt earlier. So from here we're able to make a much more specific prediction, which is that the rate from validity 2 should be much lower for not say and not think than it is for their positive or non-negative. And drum roll, this is what we see. So the blue bar are the non-negative, say and believe type verbs, and the rates of validity 2, and the red bar is what happens when we negate those verbs in the corpus. So now they're showing basically the same rates as we saw before without the corrections. And again, we can do statistical tests to confirm that this is indeed a significant effect. So, switch. In terms of empirical contributions of this work, basically what we have shown is that any theory of validity 2 is going to have to somehow account for the following facts, which is the great validity to rated by discourse. So we see an effect of formality and genre, but it's actually never all the way out. And we also see in the lexical semantic classes, although they seem to have an effect, they're in themselves not sufficient to capture the variable rates of embedded and we also observed that there's a significant interaction with negation, so the volunteer stands predicates like say and think and believe, non-negative, they notice it's embedded V2, but this seems to be largely blocked under negation. In terms of theoretical contributions, one thing that we like to point out is that one of the things that this shows us is that the difference between discourse novelty versus discourse familiarity is not the same as being at issue or not at issue. And it's actually the former that drives the distribution of embedded V2, contrary to previous claims. And this is a pragmatic notion, right? So this is now a property of an utterance in a given context. And it's going to be constrained, but it's not actually determined by the lexical semantics of a given predicate. Right, so we see, first of all, that not all factors behave in the same way with respect to this. And we also see this effect of embedding operators negation. So next up, we're experimentally manipulating the conversational context to further festival of discourse novelty or familiarity and something else that we're working on is to sort of spell out in greater detail what precise notion of discourse novelty versus familiarity that is actually relevant to licensing embedded V2. So what is the status of our common ground, and how does this relate to notions like question and discussion and issue status. Thank you very much.
Our next talk is Sarah